Hey all, Casella here. A couple quick things before we begin. First off, it's nominating season. You've got about a week left to nominate for the Hugo Awards, if that's a thing you're doing. Ancillary, A Meal of Thorns, and our contributors are eligible in various categories. There's also about a week left to nominate for the Le Guin Fiction Prize. Anyone can do that, and I think you should. The good folks at Locus Magazine reached out to ask if I would remind people about their fundraiser, which I am happy to do. And full disclosure, I do write for them. If you're not familiar with Locus, it is the trade magazine for SFF. They publish interviews, reviews, lists, and news, and obituaries, and awards, publishing developments. It's really difficult to overstate how much Locus does for the field on a nuts and bolts level, and I really enjoy the criticism and book reviewing they cultivate. It's a good magazine. I'll put a link to their fundraiser in the notes, and I'd encourage you to subscribe and support them. On a much smaller scale, Ancillary's long-promised fund drive is getting ready to kick off. You can follow our Kickstarter now to be notified when it's live, and I'm really jazzed about what hitting our goals will allow us to do. More on that soon. Thanks for listening, and now on to the show. A critic is a creature who has views quite like a camel's. Flowers and fruit he scorns. In the flower garden of the honeyed muse he starves unless he finds a meal of thorns. Hello, and welcome to A Meal of Thorns, a critical book club from the Ancillary Review of Books. I'm Jake Brookins. Each episode, we ask a writer, scholar, or critic of some kind to walk us through a book, often science fiction or fantasy, sometimes work from outside, alongside, perhaps underneath those genres. Today we're talking about Raymond Chandler's The Big Sleep, and I'm delighted to introduce our guest, Max Gladstone. Max is a Hugo, Nebula, and Locus-winning author of fiction and interactive fiction. His excellent craft sequence fantasy books have expanded with The Craft Wars, most recently Dead Hand Rule. He has lots of short fiction, interactive projects, standalone novels, including Empress of Forever, and is the co-writer of This Is How You Lose the Time War with Amal El-Motar. Max, thanks so much for joining. How are you doing?
Doing well. Thanks so much for having me on the podcast, Casella. Great to see you. Hear you.
Yes, to hear you and see you. Some feedback I've occasionally seen on podcasts is people like it when voices are really different. So I get a little spooked whenever I ask another American white guy on. So feel free to ham up your accent. I'll try to pull up some Pennsylvania Appalachian as we go. So we'll see.
Oh, okay. All right. I can try to talk a little bit more down home, but it goes a little walking on me.
Before we dive into Chandler, anything else you have been reading or watching or playing that's been really interesting lately?
Oh, sure. Let's see. With my 6-year-old, I've been watching Stranger Things, which is first season of Stranger Things, which is and very exciting ride. I missed it because I have never been a regularly television watching kind of person, and for the last 6 years, I have especially not had the space for it. So it's been cool to have that kind of grown up spooky ride and fun to see the first season finally after hearing about it for so long. I also got a big iPad around Christmas, and I have been just burning through my library's collection of graphic novel ebooks,
Oh, cool.
everything that I meant to pick up the 17 trades of back in 2011 and never got around to. It's all mine now. So I've been reading Kurt Busiek's Metro City. I just finished Matt Fraction's Sex Criminals. I did a huge Kieron Gillan run last week. I don't know where I'm finding the time from it. Probably it's coming out of sleep, but it's a good time.
I have a hard time with television, too. Television doesn't distract me as much as reading. Not that I read to distract myself, but I find myself more able to immerse myself right now in reading, so it's been good to catch up on some things right now.
Oh, absolutely. Especially if I'm watching alone or trying to watch TV alone, my attention will go out the window at a bird or something. Books, for me, are more engrossing. You have to build the whole illusion. You're pulling apart the sentences. You're trying to race ahead and see what's going to happen next. With TV, being stuck in it second by second feels like a lot. especially, I don't know, if you're the kind of person who always has like list of things to do that are churning around in your head, the question of what am
Yep.
I doing sitting here really, it becomes a pretty alive one. When I'm sitting down with friends or family, it's obvious I'm here enjoying time with these people taken in a show. But as a solo endeavor, I find books a lot more engrossing.
Yeah, yeah. I'm trying to think what I've been reading lately. It's been really good. I just started. I'm a couple chapters into Balsam Karam's Event Horizon, which is
Oh,
coming out here a
never
little
read
bit.
that
It's a
one.
Swedish, Kurdish kind of odd, very beautifully written, strange kind of dystopian novel that kind of goes to space in this sort of weird, slowly surreal way. But yeah, really, really digging that. I also have to confess, the thing I've been obsessed with this year is I'm going through John Darnielle's This Year, which is just like a cult kit. Just like open the
I've
book
been
and
meaning to pick that up.
yeah, it's
Oh,
like congrats. If you have like anxiety of influence, I can't recommend enough that you stay away from it because it's just like you're immersing yourself into like another creative person's like process so deeply. But I'm really enjoying it. I've been going through that day by day and listening, and it's not. I don't know if it's 100% chronological, but he's definitely starting the book with a lot of the really early Mountain Goats tapes. So it's
oh,
like
cool.
deep cuts, which is actually I'm finding it interesting because I don't have as much emotional connection to these songs yet.
Hmm.
Like I've heard some of them, but they're not the ones that I like listen to on repeat.
Yeah, they're gonna creep up on you. You're gonna find
Yeah.
yourself blindsided by the
So, but I'm
emotion.
kind of like finding it like a little fresher to engage with, like as lyrics.
Yeah. Well, Darnielle is one of the people that I would really love to sit on his shoulder for his creative process. So I've
Yeah.
been
Yeah.
had my eye on that one for a moment. I listened to Song Exploder a lot back when I
Mm.
was going into the weight room more, pre-COVID and pre-everything. And there was just one bit on cadaver sniffing dog, an episode that he did on cadaver sniffing dog, where he was talking about how when he's working with more genre material, he's trying to find the inner emotional core of the thing that might have absolutely zero to do with what's apparently happening on the surface.
Hmm.
He's saying, like, Cadaver Sniffing Dog, which is about a crime scene investigator coming into a place that's been totally destroyed. It's basically a breakup song. It's a song about, like, looking over the wreckage of this relationship that has gone so smashed that you see like pieces of people's teeth in the corners,
Hmm.
and that's the emotional note that it keeps coming back to. And I don't know, one of those brief asides that turned a little light on in my brain.
Yeah. No, I know the episode you're talking about, and I know that bit he said. And it's in the last episode we just recorded, we were talking a little bit about pataphysics. Pataphors, where like you kind of like move from one metaphor to another. It's like a French surrealist Alfred Jarry thing.
Oh, I don't think I've heard that before.
Yeah, but
Cool.
it's listening to Danielle talk about that song and then thinking about other songs of his, of like as a technique, if the entire work is operating at a metaphoric level that you never make clear, right? Where like
Yeah.
there's no point where one of the cops turns to the camera and says, "This is actually about a divorce," right?
Yeah,
Like no,
right.
the whole thing is about the scene you're seeing. But that idea that individual artistic works could have really powerful and actually like really clear and distinct metaphorical or like analogical levels to them that aren't there in the work itself. It's wild. I love that.
Well, it's so exciting. It's like in martial arts we'll talk sometimes about the difference between like Waigong, like the external kung fu, where if that's all about like you put your hand here, how strong is your muscle, what form and technique are you doing, and then there's the neigong, which is like either the all the mystical nonsense you're doing by inhaling, circulating your chi and using it to line the inside of your marrow or whatever, or understanding the intent and the logic that knits together all of these moves. And
Hmm.
I think a lot of books have that same distinction between like a Waigong, like an external style, and an internal heart. And often that gets confused with a meaning in like a romantic
Yeah.
play, junior year English kind
Hmm.
of way. That's all about like hunting down the essential heart of the text.
Right.
And I think uh, many more books than are meant to be read that way function by having some inner metaphorical fire that maybe the author wasn't even necessarily clear on as
Hmm.
they were working on it, that is then I don't know, projected out in all its weirdness.
Yeah. Well, there's something about that. Like the difference of reading, I feel like this is a theme that we come back to a lot in this podcast, the difference of reading things as things to be decoded,
Yes.
as opposed to like a lens, right? Like this is something
Mhm.
that you can look through at other things, and it's going to make things about them jump out at you in a different way. But that's not to say that like, you can only understand Hills Like White Elephants if you know this part of Hemingway's biography, right? Like
Right, right,
it's
right,
it's a
right, right,
terrible way to
exactly.
read. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so limiting, and it's like sort of the opposite of reading comprehension or media literacy, which gets thrown up as a sort of shibboleth or a meme in itself around or about a lot now. The sense that there is one single and correct reading to everything, and it's sort of our job to as if you either arrive at it or you have failed.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
Right. And that there's like one agreed upon, like authorized capital A meaning that you have to be able to pick out.
Right, right. So it's very, I don't know, hermeneutic.
Yeah.
Gets into the question of the hermeneutic circle a
Yep.
lot, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the maybe this is going down too much of a rabbit hole, but if you've ever spent a lot of time talking with people, or really much time at all talking with people who come from a like a fundamentalist background, especially if they describe themselves as a non-denominational Christian, right? And you ask
Mm-hmm.
them, what does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
One of the common answers that will pop up is like, well, I just believe what it says in the Bible, the literal text of the Bible. There is absolutely no hermeneutic there.
Yeah. Right.
There's only one possible meaning to any of this stuff. And some people will take that the honest way and go and like learn Aramaic and spends an enormous amount of time grinding on the text. But a lot of people will not even get that far into the layers
Mm-hmm.
of translation and will sort of be stuck with just whatever happens to pop into their head when they read it. That's it. And your meaning is invalid.
We got to talk about Chandler, but I think there's something really rich
Yeah.
here about how I don't know, a more maybe a more myotic approach to things is like a deeply like anti-fascist, anti-authoritarian sort of way to engage with a literature that's very meaningful, right?
Yeah,
Around
yeah,
us.
absolutely.
Yeah. All right.
Hmm.
Well, we'll stash that away.
Yeah, I gotta get my pipe so I can chew on it a little bit
Yeah. Yeah.
here.
All right. Or your endless array of cigars and cigarettes, and
Yes.
there's some pipes. There's some pipes, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
cigars, cigarette cases, cigar cases, little cigars. It's
I do think a lot about that thing with just like as an actor, like it's good to have a hand prop. And like
yeah.
as a writer, if you don't know what to do here, you can just have somebody offer some form of tobacco, and that gives you, a little bit of scene setting, a little bit of characterization.
Oh Jesus, and it's such a wonderful piece of characterization too, right? There's an old, vaguely associated with Dorothy Parker, but it's one of those. She's one of those people that things accumulate onto. Sort of a literary writer game of smokes, where you are attempting to describe characters, but only by
Mm, what and how?
allusions. Yeah, like well,
Yeah.
sort of like what kind of cigarette are you?
Mm-hmm.
What's your cocktail? Not factually, but just like what kind of
Yeah.
cigarette does this person remind you of?
Mm-hmm.
And these are these little consumer details, these little sort of shades of addiction and habit that in Chandler do so much work to situate somebody. You know what kind of person they are, what kind of person they're pretending to be, in much the same way that a character in the William Gibson novel will be defined by the exact cut of their coat and the material that their coffee table is made out of, and the provenance of their sneakers or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Let's get into the big sleep. So today we're talking about this novel. It's from 1939. It's Chandler's first novel, originally published by Knopf. It's something of a fix-up. I think he called it a cannibal novel, using material from short stories he'd published in pulp magazines such as Black Mask. It is set in Los Angeles, and it follows the private investigator Philip Marlowe as he's pulled into an increasingly complicated case, beginning with blackmail and spiraling out to missing persons, gambling and pornography rings, and murder. It's a classic of the hard-boiled and noir styles, and The Big Sleep has been adapted many times, and its influence is frequently detectable across a wide range of work, I would argue, in literature, film, comics, games. Now, astute listeners may note that The Big Sleep is not science fiction or fantasy. I've been wanting to do a few episodes here and there on non-speculative work that has shaped the genre. And I think Chandler is a great example. So, Max, thanks for coming on. Tell me a little bit about your relationship either with The Big Sleep in particular or Chandler more generally, or even like the genre of hard-boiled and noir stuff more generally.
It's a great question. I love noir, but came to the actual writing, the actual like source texts of it relatively late. My first several rounds of exposure were mediated both by the sort of neo-noir boom in the 90s. You know, I was a kid when movies like LA Confidential came out, right? And these were very fascinating to me. And through comic strips, you've got Tracer Bullet and Calvin and Hobbes, an extremely pitch perfect
Mm-hmm.
evocation of a Chandler-esque main character, and I think Snoopy does a hard-boiled detective bit throughout. So this notion of sort of the hard-boiled PI was sort of bouncing around before I stumbled into Hammett, and then in college Chandler, and sort of found my love there. I think I probably picked up Chandler for the first time after reading Haruki Murakami's Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World,
Oh, cool.
uh,
Yeah, yeah. Uh-huh.
and getting really curious about the sort of underpinnings of that style. But then I discovered after reading The Big Sleep and loving it and going on a big Chandler kick for a while, how many of my favorite authors from science fiction and fantasy also came out of a sort of Chandlerian space, especially earlier in their careers. Like Roger Zelazny is my favorite author as a kid, and still one of the stars in my literary constellation. And I must have read Lord of Light. I don't know. I lost track of how many times when I was a child. Um, Understanding a few more of the in jokes each time. And I came to discover had just come back from China, so it'd be 08, 09, that Zelazny had made a pass before he started writing science fiction, or very early in his career, at being exactly this kind of hard-boiled
Mm.
Chandlerian sort of detective adventure writer. In fact, Hard Case Crime came out with a paperback copy of his book, The Dead Man's Brother, which I'm not sure if it was ever formally released. Um, Wild to see Zelazny, who's usually using the science fictional tropes to play on and with the sort of hard-boiled narrative, executing sort of this pitch perfect attack. So anyway, I feel like Chandler particularly is one of those people who ends up everywhere. And of course, Chandler has his take on science fiction, which I don't know if you've run into.
So Max meant to look this up, but we forgot to come back to it, so I'm reading it here. This is from a letter Chandler wrote where he says, "Did you ever read what they call science fiction? It's a scream. It's written like this. I checked out with K-19 on Aldebaran 3 and stepped out through the Crumelite hatch on my 22 model Cyrus hardtop. I cocked the timejector in secondary and waded through the bright blue manda grass. My breath froze into pink pretzels. I flicked on the heat bars and the brills ran swiftly on 5 legs, using their other 2 to send out Krylon vibrations. The pressure was almost unbearable, but I caught the range on my wrist computer through the transparent sissocytes. I pressed the trigger. The thin violet glow was ice cold against the rust-colored mountains. The brills shrank to half an inch long, and I worked fast, stepping on them with the Pultex, but it wasn't enough. The sudden brightness swung me around, and the 4th moon had already risen. I had exactly 4 seconds to hot up the disintegrator, and Google had told me it wasn't enough. He was right."
Can you believe they get paid good money for this? Notable for being the first case in the English language where anybody asks Google for something.
It's wild coming back to this. I hadn't picked up Chandler in a long time, and I think the thing that jumped out at me the most reading it was not like, so the plot stuff's interesting, and there's more I want to say about neo noir and like the sort of like absurdist, nihilist, existential kind of edge it's walking, and like you can see how you can just kind of turn that dial up a bit and
Yeah.
go really interesting places. But I think what jumped out at me the most was just his style on the page and just how like snappy it is.
Yeah.
comparing this to other people who are like, are great in this genre, comparing them to Hammett, comparing to maybe like Double Indemnity or something like that, which are really fun. But this is like line by line, just like bangers.
It's all hits. It's like
It's
you
all
took out
hits.
all of the non-hit lines in the
Yep.
book.
Waterson's, Tracer Bullet being such a good riff on it. That's part of why it's so great is because he's not afraid to ham it up. And like this is hammed up
Yeah.
all the way through. And it's like, I've got, what is it? I got 3 shots in me, 2 are lead and one's
Two
bourbon
bourbon
kind of
and one
thing.
lead. Yeah, yeah.
And once you see those kind of like rhythms and this, I don't know what to call it specifically. So there's a lot of irony, there's a lot of understatement, but there's a lot of this sort of like this kind of underdog sense that I'm going to retain some amount of control of this situation verbally, even if
Yeah.
it's just sort of how I characterize it internally, right? That like this is like, Chandler had a rough time, like the 20s and 30s are not a great time in most parts of the world, they're not a great time in America. These are characters who are down on their luck and are scrabbling. And then to have Marlowe or to have many of the characters he's talked to just put these little spins and these flourishes and these little understatements that like kind of like put you on top in this weird way
Yeah.
was really fascinating. And it made me look at how that style is deployed. Like, I mean, Gibson obviously uses this a lot, right, in the early stuff. And just how that being able to sort of like present a certain kind of maybe even slightly self-effacing understatement to the world is this way of sort of like retaining like but deep down I am in control of this situation, even if these 5 heavies have guns on me and I don't really know what's going on. If I can kind of make a crack at it, I've sort of like held on to it somehow. I was really noticing that on this read.
Yeah, I think that's very astute and gets at the sort of social and moral level on which Marlowe and also Chandler are operating. These are people who are in a profoundly out of control situation, um, and attempting to find. Well, I was about to say control, but it's not control because I think Marlowe gets that control is impossible,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
Like, again, I wish I'd printed this out and had it to immediately refer to, but Chandler talks in one of his essays on detective fiction about how you can work on trying to solve the world by mathematics in a very classical golden age detective story kind of way, but that's not how it really seems to work. There aren't clues properly presented. They don't all line up for you, and you'll very rarely ever get all of the suspects in a drawing room to hear you spin out the heart of the tale. In fact, the thing is big and complicated and terrifying, and some days all you have is your own. The only thing there is like one person's ability to walk and make their own choices in a big and complicated world. The sort of lone knight figure from his
Hmm.
fiction. The motif of the knight comes up again and again in The Big Sleep, right? He's the knight over the Sternwood's door at the beginning. And Chandler's like, Marlowe's like, oh, I want to go up there and give him a hand with it. He doesn't seem to be getting anywhere.
Hmm.
And then later on, with in the scene where Carmen Sternwood, one of the daughters of the general, is like basically come over to Marlowe's house to proposition him. Marlowe is uh, not dealing with her, sitting there looking at a chess problem and trying to solve it using knights. And he says, "This
Hmm.
isn't a game for knights." Um, this sense that the police may be corrupt, the entire world may be warped by what money gets you and what it doesn't. Um, the gangsters may be after you. There may be no way to square yourself with Eddie Mars in the final analysis, and there may be no justice in any conventional sense of the word. But there can be an order to things inside your own soul, your own heart. You can decide your path and walk it. And it's really interesting to me reading The Big Sleep, seeing how and who he connects with. There are these moments where game recognizes game almost. Like he sees somebody who's on the same side, even though there might be literally against him in the moment. Thinking specifically of Agnes's um, boyfriend, the little guy who comes to
Yeah,
try to
right.
blackmail him for the information, or not blackmail, sell him the information about where Silverwig is, where Eddie Mars's wife is hidden toward the end of the story. And he's surprised by that. Like, I don't know, like a whale that's wandering in solitary icy waters, like meets another whale. It's like, oh shit, you're something like me in all this.
There's something really fascinating to me about how today we have this really well established idea trope of someone who sort of like operates by their own code, right?
Yeah,
And
right.
like there's a lot of kind of like riffs on how that intersects maybe with like kind of like quasi modern like Bushido ideas, right?
Hmm.
Crosses over a lot into crime and cop fiction and movies of someone I got to kind of follow my own code. This is higher calling kind
Yeah,
of thing. And Marlowe is doing his own thing, and he's not right. He's not easily bought out or something like that. But it's not totally enunciated what that is. And
right.
in this way that I think is really rich and really interesting. He doesn't just fall back on this. No, like I don't do X, Y, or Z, or I always do X, Y, or Z. But he's driven to do something beyond just what the job is in this way that keeps opening the text up. The basic job he's given to do and that is always his excuse to the whole novel. So I'm doing this job for General Sternwood, right?
Right.
But that job is basically resolved like 3 or 4 chapters in, like it's done.
Immediately.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then he just kind of keeps going. But again, I love that it's not just that like he is clearly the shining knight, right? He's
Right.
not this paladin who never does anything wrong, but he is motivated by something deeper and more complicated in this way that's really rich. And as much as I was thinking about all these other modern things this has impacted in science fiction and fantasy places, I feel like this has shown up. I was thinking before I read Chandler, I played Max Payne,
Oh, there we
which
go. Yes.
yeah, which in like when was that, like 2000, 2002, something like that. And I remember picking this up and being like, oh, here I know this text. Like I've seen this style before. But thinking about
Where's the slow-mo button?
yeah, right. But I was thinking a lot about actually like Camus novels, right? Or like
Yes.
Sartre's plays and these ideas of like people who are trying to build meaning out of an essentially meaningless world without falling back on some simple code, but
Mhm.
trying to make something that is sort of coming from within you and telling you where to go. And Marlowe, again, without ever like getting up on a soapbox, this is for a novel that's all in first person. It is a remarkably non-internal book. It
Yeah.
is so external. You only get surfaces. It's wild.
You get peeks at what's underneath through metaphor. You get
Hmm.
a sense of what details he's following, but it's prose that you can follow the way you can follow an actor's line of sight in a shot or the camera's intent in a movie. And I think that's one of the reasons that
Hmm.
noir can become such a rich cinematic genre. You have that same sense of what the hell is going on inside this guy's head.
That's really interesting. No, that totally tracks. Yeah, I don't know that I've ever read a novel in first person that reveals so little directly
Yeah.
of what he's thinking, which is wild.
Yeah, it's a wonderful thing. It's and very unsettling. And sort of it took me a while to get comfortable with the more loquacious first person narrator because I think I'd come to this is a kind of first person that shows up in Zelazny a lot and also pops around in science fiction. You can get a surprising number of even Heinlein does this, like narrators who will opine at you at times. They will give you their theory of the case. They will talk to you about lunar politics, but there's no sense of any of like what's going on underneath.
Hmm.
And, sometimes it comes off as a very like unreconstructed 50s masculinity, like your emotions should be somewhere else under control. But often it gets just weirder than that. I mean, you can almost talk about Severian in the Book of the New Sun as this kind of narrator, right? He's very wordy. He will happily talk to you about his theories, but you're always wondering, is this guy putting me on?
Hmm.
What's going on behind the curtain?
And there's this interesting thing too, like coming from an investigator and coming from someone who is thinking a lot about how might this play out in court, how might this
Yeah,
play out in a
right.
newspaper. of really never talking about intention, right? Like only
Yes.
giving you, here's what I did, here's what I went, here's what I said.
Yeah.
Not why I did it, not what I was thinking about. And a lot of that, like that Heinleinian sort of, yes, the narrator is telling you a lot, but it's all this kind of thinking. This
Yeah,
kind of
right.
like restricts it to like, no, just action. I will
That's
tell
right.
you, I will speak to you, but I'm just going to tell you what I did.
And there are these moments in action the where the voice breaks open just a little bit. Um, uh, there's a moment where, see if I can find this, where he's wrestling with Geiger's lover, who is like common, who's just shot a witness in a
Hmm.
case, and
Oh, yeah,
uh,
yeah.
yeah,
Like two strange creatures under the moon. Yeah.
yes,
Uh-huh.
yes, exactly. Um, you get a sense of some of Marlowe's heart being revealed to you in these moments. Um, and then it closes right back up again.
Hmm. This is kind of jumping the gun a little bit because I want to talk about women and Marlowe's relationship with
Yeah,
women.
sure.
In this book, there's a lot, but one of the things really early that I sat and just like I read the line and then I just sat and unpacked it for a bit was when he's being introduced to the general who will be his client. He says, "I'm unmarried because I don't like policemen's wives." And I just had to I like put the book down and like had to think about that a second. It's like, oh, because like you would have been a policeman.
Yeah.
You don't like the kind of woman who would like the kind of person who you maybe are. And it's this real right. This I mean, not to like put
Yeah.
too big a thing on it. It's this fear of being known, right? And this
Oh,
sort of
right.
like
Yeah.
knowing yourself and being a little worried that someone else might know what you are is kind of all through this at an odd level.
And then sort of wondering what what place who you are puts you in.
Hmm.
Yeah.
A lot we could say about Marlowe's relationships with women, the characters here. I mean, first off, there's just some great characters.
Mhm.
The exchanges that he has with Vivian are just wonderful. So good. There's so much. It's funny. I was going back and I read the Maltese Falcon, which is so much meaner than
Oh,
this.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But this is really like snarky and sniping in a way
Hmm.
that's really really fun. And constantly trying to sort of like I don't know, just show again that like verbal thing to like show like kind of like who's won the scene a little
Yeah.
bit. There's that point where Vivian says, can I call you? Or no, she says, you can call me Vivian.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank
And
you,
he
Mrs.
says,
Reagan. Yeah.
thank you, Mrs. Yeah, right. Like, and storms out. It's so good.
Yes, it's tremendous, and I think a lot to be said about Chandler and women, Marlowe and women. But I'm ev given the reputation that attaches to noir and to the hardboiled detective, especially for like a kind of very shallow and one or maybe at most two-dimensional misogyny. I'm always surprised when I come back to the text, especially of like The Big Sleep, The Long Goodbye,
Hmm.
by how I'm having trouble putting it exactly into words. Marlowe may have dismissive attitudes towards characters and may use language that occasionally I find like breathtakingly
Hmm.
misogynist. But I always feel that I have a sense of these women as real people who might exist and have recognizable psychology.
Yeah. Uh
Like
huh.
they have goals, they are moving through the world in a way that I recognize as human, given the place that they're in and the tools that are available to them. They are no more inherent and no less inherently compromised by evil or than anyone else in Chandler's universe. Um, no, Vivian is not quite operating in exactly the same way that Marlowe is himself, but he recognizes her as another operator, even if he
Yeah.
doesn't have that same profound level of respect that he develops for and what's his name, Harry,
Yeah. Harry
uh,
Jones. Yeah.
Harry Jones,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Um,
That sense that like there are a few there are a few women just as there are plenty of men here who are like this sort of like really shallow, just sort of playing a bit. But then there are these some people who are, another player on the board in this
Right.
way that feels genuine. It takes away from that, or undercuts that idea of noir as like only having like this like Madonna whore kind of relationship to it.
Right, like even a character like Agnes, who is not a player in the way that Vivian is a player. So like Agnes in The Big Sleep is, is working for this sort of pornographer and small-time blackmailer named Geiger. She's the lady who runs the front of the shop. She is involved with a couple of the other sort of small-time crooks that we run into throughout the series. And in the end, she sells Marlowe a piece of information that he needs to like go and hunt down, solve the plot. Um, and she is, she is not portrayed with, she has a shape and a direction in the story. She's taking action the way that she seems to need,
Mm-hmm.
she feels she needs to take it. She's not like a violent person. But as soon as Marlowe comes in, you see her size. Sorry, we meet her as Marlowe comes into the pornographic bookstore that's sort of has a very flimsy front as an antique bookshop. She comes up to receive him as a customer, and you see her evaluating him and her opinions of him changing throughout based on his actions, what he betrays, what he doesn't. And she's when we last see her, she's happy to take the money for the information payoff and blow town, but you get the sense that she's not just a passive person in all this. Like she's been trying to find the best out for her in every single situation she's been in. Some of those situations she's not been equal to.
Well, I think that's what makes her so interesting is like not a cardboard sort of
Yes.
stand-in, and she is not the most competent character, right? And she's not like the criminal mastermind who has everything figured out. But she is figuring things out. She's doing them for her own reasons. She's moving sort of like only lightly intersecting with Marlowe and what everyone else is doing. She's her own animal, you know what I mean?
Yes.
In a way that kind of jumps off the page unusually and has not a ton of, she's not deeply tied to the plot. She doesn't immediately put sexual hooks into Marlowe the way that some of the other
Right.
characters do.
Yep.
She's kind of doing her thing, in a way
Yeah.
that is cool. I also find on the like shallower but sort of more haunting level, the fact that the book ends with Marlowe thinking about Silverwig,
Yeah.
a character who we've met for all of like 2 sentences,
Oh gosh.
is
Yes.
such a strange note. I mean, I love it. It almost makes me recalibrate Marlowe like entirely at the end. It's like you went through
Hmm.
this whole thing and then you're just thinking about this one lady you met for like one scene,
Hmm.
who clearly didn't really care about you, doesn't know who you are. But like, that's
Yeah.
how you're trying to reframe the story as, oh, it's all about this one that got away. And it
Yeah.
makes me rethink Marlowe as a character in this interesting way.
I mean, she does come through for him in this extremely rare way in the story,
Hmm.
right? Like we get some people like Oles setting him up with the job initially. General Sternwood doesn't do anything to pull the rug out from under him, but Silverwig has no reason to help him, at least that I find in the page.
Hmm.
This is a racketeer's mall, basically, who's being hidden away for plot reasons. And Marlowe's come to find her and been blackjacked by this hitman and is about to be killed. And Silverwig helps him escape. And then as there's this sort of pivotal gunfight between Marlowe, sorry, and the hitman, and Silverwig at one point says, "Oh, he's there. He's behind the car. He's getting ready." And the gunman like wastes his last bullet and is turned around, and then Marlowe manages to get the drop on him. There's no reason for her to do that. It's not like a canny play. I found myself thinking about that a lot as I was going back, and I don't know. Maybe my read is just that Marlowe is also puzzled. Like there's no angle.
Yeah, there's no angle, and that's what's so haunting about it. And that's, for all that this book and this style like rely on these like big complicated puzzle plots, It's also fascinating how kind of like loose and weird this is. And I
Yes.
think part of that is because it's a fix up, right?
Makes so much sense. I didn't know that it was a fix-up. I had never run into that in the history of the text, but it makes a lot of sense. And it also makes the loopiness of it even cooler that he
Yeah.
manages so many fix-ups. Another connection that this and detective fiction generally has to genre, right, is the popularity of the fix-up as a narrative style. And I'm used to seeing them as coherent blobs of short story that have been placed into gems of short story, maybe that have been
Hmm.
placed into a sort of gold setting of over of general narrative. But this is everything is much more linked in with everything else.
Well, and that it makes Marlowe's passage through this strange plot space, I think,
Hmm.
work really well because it's not that there's one mastermind plan. There's
No.
like nine people who have slightly overlapping weird plots, and he's just trying to like kind of make his way through them in this odd way. But it makes the points that don't quite click stand out so much, like why Silverwig decides to do that,
Why the chauffeur dies.
why the chauffeur dies, who killed him exactly, not hyper clear.
That was a notable feature of the notable piece of the Chandler mythology anyway, is him being asked long after I think the movie came out anyway, who killed the chauffeur in the movie. It's almost explicable in the book,
Hmm.
like as suicide as it's presented, but since Carmen doesn't function quite the same way,
Hmm.
and it wasn't even around if I'm remembering correctly. Anyway, in the film, the working out of the plot is different. So and Chandler just sort of shrugs. And I don't know, I was drunk when I wrote it, kind of thing.
Worked just fine, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it worked. It worked.
Random thing, just more worlds colliding. I when I was getting ready for this episode, I was looking through the credits for the movie, and Faulkner and Leigh Brackett are the screenwriters, like,
Oh my God,
right?
really? Oh
Yeah, and
wow.
and uh,
Oh, of
and uh,
course.
Jules Furman, who did a lot of other Hollywood stuff, but that idea of like those worlds colliding right here,
Faulkner and Leigh Brackett.
right?
Wow. Not the only Bogart joint that Faulkner co-screenwrote on. Also, it was a To Have and To Have Not. The first Bogart Bacall picture.
Okay.
Big Sleep being another one. Bacall's screen debut. She sings in this movie. Anyway, great picture and co-written screenwriting shared between Faulkner and Hemingway.
Okay. Oh, jeez.
So, there's like hard-bitten drinking people bouncing around the South kind of stuff, and then there's deep sea marlin fishing, and then there's some Nazis, and it's great, great movie.
That's great. Back to that idea of like the sort of like stitch together things being not totally explained. One of the things I love is I love the absence. I love any piece of art that works around an absence, and Rusty Regan being this sort of
Yes.
like magnet through this whole work. This guy who's married to one of the characters who the general really liked, and he's like maybe behind some stuff, but Marlowe thinks pretty quickly probably not. I love a work where someone who never shows up on the page directly exerts such a weird power over all of it. And is like this like sort of weird doppelganger in a way, right? That like he is this extremely or Rusty is or was this extremely competent person that everyone kind of liked, who like slept with all the women that Marlowe's attracted to, who is like respected like a
Yeah.
son by the father figure of the general that Marlowe kind of clicks with, but that he's not there.
Yeah, sort of Shadow Marlowe or
Yeah.
Bright Side Marlowe kind of. Yes.
And just pulls it all the way through. And then, again, like, and I feel like that somehow, I haven't quite figured this out in my head, but that somehow lines up with why Silverwig's sudden switching of teams at the ends works so well. Because she's supposed to be with Rusty is like the
Yeah,
story.
she's on Rusty's side.
But
Yeah.
then when Marlowe shows up, she's just on his side for a second.
That's true because he talks to her about Rusty, doesn't he? Or I
Hmm.
don't think that's just completely implied. And the distinction between Rusty and Eddie Mars. I love Marlowe's line. I think it's when he's talking with Eddie in Eddie's club about how, Mars says, I didn't rub off Rusty Regan. And and Marlowe says, yeah, I saw his picture. You don't have the men for that kind of job. Like maybe Canino could have handled it, maybe,
Hmm.
but just this is a person who's playing a different game in a different sphere.
Hmm.
Um, but definitely one of those people that Marlowe, even not having met him, recognizes as sort of playing legitimately. Um, and it says something I think that most of those people end up dead by the end of the book,
Uh-huh.
dead or having blown down.
When it goes back to the idea of like that sort of like code and something about like
Yeah.
holding yourself in a competent sort of way. And I also think there's something weird there where like we should mention if people haven't read this, like in addition to the misogyny in the book, there's some just screaming homophobia.
Oh God, yes.
Just flabbergasting, right? Especially.
Yeah, it's breathtaking. More than the misogyny actually, which I expect
Hmm.
because of the myth of the noir thing.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
actually, a weird thing to say, but I think taking it out makes the film weaker because so much of it works because just much like the sort of like downplaying the pornography ring, I think takes away from how the
Yeah.
plot actually works out. But alongside that, there's this intense desire for homosocial relations, right?
Yes.
That like Marlowe is so alone and he so wants to be the general's son. And
Hmm.
he's, even I think with Eddie Mars, he wants to like, I want you to see that like we're on the same level. I'm not wealthy like you, but like we could be buds if you were straight, like,
Yeah, yeah, right, right.
and with the, who is it?
Is his like friendship with
Yeah,
Oles.
with Oles, yeah, the detective
Yeah.
or the police investigator.
Yeah.
There's this intense desire for that, and it's none of them are ever realized.
Yes.
And this constant sort of like seeing in people like what I might respect in you or what you might respect in me, but not finding a space where we can be there as equals is a strange thing throughout the book.
Yeah, I know a guy. I'm trying to remember if this is a personal friend of mine or if this is something I saw John Levitt say on some microblog at some point. I think this is a strong misreading given the text, but somebody put it in my ear at some point that Philip Marlowe is obviously gay,
Mm,
because of both the virulence of the homophobia when it shows up is like it's such an obvious was for this reader such an obvious front, and the dismissiveness and sort of distance with which he plays most of his connections with women.
mm-hmm.
Um, Struck this one particular reader as real
Yeah,
tells, especially given how little access we have to Marlowe's interiority.
right. Huh.
I'm going to stick with that as strong misreading, but
But
it's sort
I
of
can see it as an
haunted.
approach. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Hmm.
But yes, yeah, he's desperate for friendship, and he doesn't live in a world that allows it or that seems to provide much structure for it.
Yeah, I work alone.
Yeah, he works alone. I mean, it's an interesting question. Like, why is he not with the cops? And this is the the less ACAB of the Marlowe oeuvre. Like
Mm-hmm.
later books, I think both High Window and The Long Goodbye have a much more jaundiced perspective on the police, how they do what they do, why they do it. But it's a sort of interesting running question of why Marlowe's on the out in this
And
book.
there's even, I mean, there's seeds of it here, right? Like they don't get a
Yeah.
ton of space, but like there's a point when the one person at the DA's office, tells him, life is a life. If there's been a murder, we got to go solve it. And Marlowe says, yeah, tell that to your cops next time they shoot some petty thief, running
Yeah,
away with a
right.
radio or something, right?
No, it's true.
And then there's the bit that actually comes from, I wrote it down here. It's from Oles, from his buddy the investigator. They're talking about kind of like how things are going to shake out at the end with the prison sentences and what they're going to charge people with and stuff. And he says, I'd like to see the flashy, well-dressed mugs like Eddie Mars spoiling their manicures in the rock quarry at Folsom, alongside of the poor little slum-bred hard guys that get knocked over on their first caper and never had a break since. That's what I'd like. You and me both lived too long to think I'm likely to see it happen. Not in this town, not in any town half this size, in any part of this wide, green, and beautiful USA. We just don't run our country that way.
Oh, yeah.
And that's a cop says that, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Right. Whew. Yeah, chills on that one too.
Let's take a quick break. I want to grab a drink of water. I want to talk about one or two quick other things in this book that just really struck me, and I want to ask you what else you've been working on.
Sounds good.
We are back. We are still talking with Max Gladstone about The Big Sleep. We've been talking about the book itself, what it influences, where we see it. There's just one. I mean, there's lots more we can talk about. This is it's a rich text. We haven't even talked about the over the top actual metaphors on the page, which are just so good.
Nonstop.
Nonstop. In like the first chapter or two, I just wrote down. There's nasty meaty leaves and stalks like the newly washed fingers of dead men.
Oh gosh,
Talking about the
yes.
plants in the greenhouse.
Oh, I love reading that intertextually with Nero Wolfe's whole orchid fixation too.
He describes the general as using his strength as carefully as an out-of-work showgirl uses her last good pair of stockings. Later on, when he's rescuing Carmen from the weird situation, the giggles got louder and ran around the corners of the room like rats behind the wainscoting. It's just like nonstop.
Yeah. And the use of comparison. I don't know, this line here really stuck out for me when he goes into Vivian's bedroom and it's describing, this architectural detail. There's this white carpet, there's full-length mirrors, there's ivory furniture and ivory drapes, and then he comes around to the white made the ivory look dirty and the ivory made the white look bled out.
So good. That's like opening paragraph, right?
Yeah,
Like when he meets her, like, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So good. The other thing, this is maybe the less interesting thing to talk about, but it's something that was jumping out a lot to me reading this was the specifics of, I guess, OPSEC, like the tradecraft, how it works here.
Very detailed.
I was really noticing how much thought and intention goes into how we get from place to place, whether or not we call a cab, are they going to remember us, how carefully we're setting up alibis, thinking about where we're calling from, like this knowledge that things can be traced and that like the time of phone calls can be recorded. It's just pervasive. And I'm sure that was like honed. I mean, you see it in other, you see it in, I already mentioned Double Indemnity, like you see it in other work of like this hard-boiled kind. But it was really striking to me thinking how much that kind of thing shows up in cyberpunk. Yes. And also thinking about how difficult that is to do in like modern detective and cop stuff just because of the complexity of the technology is on such a different, less tangible level. Yeah. But how like that is like when Marlowe is thinking what he's going to do next, he's thinking, what trace am I going to be leaving? What kind of signals am I sending by every action I take in this way that's so rich? And partially it's just the technology level, but I just found that really fascinating.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And also, to your point much earlier, talking about our access to his interiority, we see him taking the steps, but we very rarely see his explanation of the steps. So if you're not following along and really mathing it out in your head, there can seem to be a kind of mystical significance to everything he's doing. Why is he stepping here and not here? Mm-hmm. Why is he walking home? Why, where is the car? Why is he not making a phone call? Or why is he only saying this on the phone call?
Yeah, he turns down the taxi cab from the butler, right? And just says like,
yes.
No, it'd be better if I walk. He's like, it's raining out, like, well, no, it'd be better. Yeah.
Yeah, right. The notion of somebody walking anywhere in LA, period, let alone 45 minutes through the valley to the one gas station. Wild. It's really cool. And yeah, you're dealing with more external technology here. The tradecraft is very weird in modern stories because of the distortions of both like the pervasive surveillance culture, right? And then the degree to which activating it requires focus and authority. Almost anyone who has a cell phone can be tracked. Almost anyone who has the kind of digital footprint that is transparent to someone who has authority. Your forensic signatures can be followed. People can get a map of like what you did in this hotel room. But if you're watching cop shows, all of that stuff is instantaneous and flawless.
Right.
To the extent we have now this, the CSI effect on juries, right? Where juries will reject normal sort of gumshoe police work because it isn't accompanied with a luminol test and DNA tracing and all of this stuff that practically speaking, there's a 6-week wait for at the lab
Right.
and is nowhere near as conclusive as you might think. So,
It's the Jeffrey Rowland, the webcomic. He's got a recurring bit about this terrible show that's just called Science Cop. I'll science it. The last thing I wanted to say on this book before just kind of looking wider is I was thinking about, you'd mentioned earlier, you were talking about the neo-noir revival, right, in starting in the 90s and still continuing very strong. And I was just noticing this, and this goes back to that kind of being a fix-up, kind of being very opaque in a lot of ways, but just how much ambiguity and sort of like potential strangeness there is in that. And there being no mastermind and there being no master plot. This is not Sherlock with a different attitude, right?
right.
It's a very different situation in what's happening. And I was thinking about the way that, like, in neo-noir, if you go all the way to something like David Lynch, where you can't reduce
Right.
that, right? But the seeds of that are here in this interesting way, and they're not buried that deep. All of these little details, little strangenesses, and like that feeling of like running into characters like Agnes who are doing their own things and sort of like threatening to pull the gravity of the narrative in different ways all the time is this very odd, unstable space in its way that's really interesting.
Yeah, if the classic sort of golden age detective story is a high modernist project, right? Like there is a truth. It can be seen by those with the wit and resources to see it, and it can be explained in a parlor scene.
Mm-hmm.
We can get everything. All of the random facts of life will be locked in to our system. By the time we get to Chandler, we're not quite there. There are truths to be discovered, but there's no synoptic view of everything. The detective's situated in the mess with all the rest of them. And Marlowe comes to the right conclusions in the end and survives. He figures out what he thinks is happening. But even by the time we get to the end, there are lots of loose ends and loops that haven't quite closed. We get this one person's very expert perspective. We're not quite in the Paul Auster zone yet, where everything deteriorates into metafiction. But it's definitely somebody telling a story that makes sense of the chaos. And this is one of those ways that I think detective fiction can be the most writerly genre because on some level the writer is coming to the page in exactly the same position as the detective is. Like, especially in noir, you're coming in kind of exhausted, compromised, no longer that old strength which in former days moved earth and heaven. And you got to figure out what the hell is going on with these very weird people who have presented themselves to you.
There's a really great bit in Peter Brook's Reading the Plot. I don't know if you know this. It's like narratology text.
No.
Yeah, it's like narratology book, but where he talks about, like a writer, like a detective, is never constructing; they're always reconstructing.
Wow.
And he makes a lot of hay out of plot being both what books have and what conspirators have and what pieces of land have. He does a lot of that. Yeah,
That's great.
Max, thanks so much for suggesting this book and for talking to us. Before we go, anything you want to share with people about what you have out or coming out or where people can find you?
Oh, my pleasure. Let's see. I'm working right now on the last volume of the Craft project. Book 10. I'm doing it. I'm finishing the multi-volume fantasy epic. It's gonna happen. Uh, Speaking of not being now what in former days moved earth and heaven, it's happening slowly, but it's getting there. And beyond that, I have another couple of projects that I'm really excited to talk about, but can't yet.
Okay.
And in the meantime, folks can follow along at my website, which is maxgladstone.com, where I have a button-down newsletter that's linked off of the website.
Cool. Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you so much. Looking forward to reading what's next. And yeah, I'm gonna be circling the noir for a bit now. So thank you.
Excellent. My pleasure. Great talking with you, Casella. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
A Meal of Thorns is a podcast from the Ancillary Review of Books, an online magazine founded to address the radical possibilities of criticism, with a focus on speculative fiction, world literature, and utopian impulses. Go to ancillaryreviewofbooks.org for regular reviews, essays, interviews, and more. Our opening poem is by Bartra Hari, translated by John Bruff. Our music is by Giselle Gabriel Garcia. Incidental music this episode from David Hilowitz's Future Cities. Our artwork is by Rob Patterson at The Ratio Farm. If you'd like to support the podcast and the Ancillary Review of Books, congrats! You may be good. A few different ways you can do that. You can join our Patreon. Throw us a couple bucks a month to keep the podcast and the magazine sustainable. You can hang out with us on Discord, and we've got a few other perks on the way. If you're interested in a book we mentioned on the podcast, buying from the bookshop link in our show notes or at the ARB website gets us a cut. It helps immensely if you just help get the word out about the show. Leaving a review, commenting, or sharing on your platform of choice, that really helps. And it's nice to know you're listening. Questions, suggestions, elaborate compliments, drop us an email at mealofthorns@gmail.com, and you can also follow us on Blue Sky for however long that stays cool, and probably slightly past that. Next time, Abigail Nussbaum is on to talk to me about David Mitchell's Cloud Atlas, and after that, Matthew Leggett from the Utopian and Dystopian Fictions podcast joins to discuss Ready Player One. Oh boy, good talk though. If you want to read ahead, check out the website for upcoming selections, and again, please keep an eye out for the ARB fundraiser. Thanks for listening, and stay critical out there.